Russia was never supposed to worry about attacks on its own territory. That's what Vladimir Putin thought when he launched his special military operation. Even when that initial operation turned into a full-blown war, Putin was convinced that the fight he started would never affect his own territory. That was a long time ago, and Russia has absorbed dozens of Ukrainian long-range strikes since. Now it's set to face even more attacks on its refineries and military infrastructure. This time, it won't be domestically produced Ukrainian drones that are doing the damage. The Czech Narwhal cruise missile is almost here, and it's threatening to make Ukraine's long-range strategy more effective than ever before. On December 9th, RBC Ukraine was among several outlets to report on comments made by the co-owner of the Czech weapons company LPP. According to that co-owner, the company is on the verge of completing testing on a new long-range cruise missile dubbed the Narwhal, and it will soon move into production. And once production begins, there is only one country on LPP's collective mind for combat testing and utilizing its new weapon: Ukraine. The RBC Ukraine report is based on an article published by the Czech news outlet Aktualna, which provides a lot more details about the current state of the Narwhal and when Ukraine can expect to get its hands on the missile. The outlet claims that Ukraine won't have to wait long to get its hands on the new weapon, which LPP says is capable of striking targets up to 680 kilometers or around 422 miles away. It's a matter of weeks rather than months before this new missile enters full production, at which point LPP will be building them in high enough numbers for Ukraine to do some serious damage against a host of military targets inside Russia. How much damage can the Narwhal do? We'll answer that question in a moment when we take a closer look at the missile's capabilities. Aktualne also reveals that LPP expects the first combat tests of its new missile to happen inside Ukraine at some point during January or February 2026, which gives us another hint at how close the company is to making its new weapon a viable option for Ukraine. Radim Petrash, who is the co-owner of LPP, crystallizes this point by emphasizing that what his company has created is far from a vague concept or a barely functioning prototype. "We have a solution that is real, and it's not just a model that says we would like to deal with it," Petrash declared when announcing LPP's near readiness to begin supplying Ukraine. Petrash went on to point out that Ukraine also doesn't have to worry about the production side of things with the Narwhal. Unlike other missile manufacturers, which often have to purchase components from other companies before they can build their weapons, LPP builds the Narwhal almost entirely in-house. "We don't have any critical suppliers. We manufacture everything, from the airframe to the composite to the autopilot. LPP even builds its own jet engines for its drones," Aktualne reveals, as the company has received a license to do so from another business. Of course, questions remain. The Narwhal is almost ready, not 100% ready. And that may leave you wondering how long it will take for the missile to enter serial production and how many Narwhals Ukraine will receive. Neither of these questions has a clear answer, though Petrash gives us enough to make some vague estimates. Aktualne claims that the LPP co-owner believes that his country's new missile could enter serial production as early as March 2026, assuming combat tests go as expected in Ukraine between January and February. As for the scale of that production, Petrash says, "When we say that it works in Ukraine, we will start accepting the first orders. In the first year or two, we would like to produce hundreds of units per year." The LPP co-owner doesn't say that all of these new cruise missiles will be delivered to Ukraine, and it's also unclear if hundreds means 200 or 900. Still, based on this comment alone, we can assume that Ukraine is set to receive a healthy stock of a new missile that opens up a wealth of opportunities in its long-range strike strategy. The reason this weapon could prove so important to Ukraine is that it's unlike any other missile, drone or drone-missile hybrid that the country has in its arsenal. In its own report on the Narwhal, Defense Express reveals just how devastating this missile could be. It quotes the same 680-kilometer range that we mentioned earlier, though it also points out that this range is enough to allow the Narwhal to strike targets in the Moscow region. Engels Air Base would also fall within the missile's range, which is huge news for Ukraine. Engels has been a target before, and its status as a strategic bomber base means that the Narwhal may allow Ukraine to destroy some of Russia's most valuable airframes. Russia is actively trying to expand that airbase as we speak. In October, UKR Inform labeled the base the main hub of strategic aviation from which aircraft carriers launch strikes on Ukraine. Recognizing the importance of such a base, Russia is building new hard stands for a small fleet of its most dangerous bomber and fighter jets. The 8th Separate Battalion Arata, which is part of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, reveals this information in a Telegram post, stating, "In the northern part of the base, concrete is being poured, and preparations are underway for 12 new hard stands for Tu-95MS, Tu-160, Su-34, and Su-35 aircraft. There could only be one reason why Russia would engage in such widespread construction at the Engels Air Base, and the Errata Battalion explains what that reason is. Active construction indicates that Russia is preparing for new strikes. Ukraine needs to scale up its own deep strike capabilities, drones, long-range missiles, and precise weapons to preemptively strike such bases, it says in its Telegram post. If Russia is preparing a base for more long-range strikes, Ukraine has to respond with a build-up of its own. The arrival of the narwhal seems to be happening at just the right time for Ukraine to target the jets and bombers that will soon make their way to Engels. Back to the narwhal's specifications. Defense Express adds that the new missile is capable of hitting speeds up to 750 kilometers or around 466 miles per hour, and that it can deliver a 120 kilogram or 264 pound warhead. That's enough explosive firepower to punch a hole into an aircraft hangar if Ukraine scores a direct hit. And it's more than enough to absolutely destroy any bomber or fighter jet that Russia is foolish enough to leave exposed in Engels or anywhere else within the narwhal's range. Defense Express offers up a comparison to Russia's Shahid drones, which typically carry warheads weighing between 50 and 90 kilograms or 110 and 198 pounds. Ukraine has seen how much damage Russia's Shahids can do to its cities. The narwhal is powerful enough to enable Ukraine to do even more damage to Russia's military facilities. Of course, none of this power will matter if the narwhal isn't capable of reaching its target. Russia has advanced its electronic warfare or EW countermeasures immensely since Putin launched his invasion, as the Insider revealed back in January 2024. The outlet noted that Russia can use EW techniques such as GPS jamming to send Ukraine's long-range drones off course, though it also has to shut down mobile internet services in targeted regions to do so. Nevertheless, this capability shows us that a drone or missile that relies on GPS alone is a weapon for which Russia has a counter. LPP thought of that problem when developing the narwhal, and it's come up with a brilliant solution. The narwhal is equipped with the standard GPS seen in many other drones and missiles. If the missile happens to attack a target that has no EW defenses, that GPS will be more than enough to guide it to its target. However, the narwhal isn't rendered ineffective should it run into EW interference at any point during its journey. If the missile's GPS is disabled, and the assumed inertial navigation system that Defense Express says is likely going to be in the missile isn't enough to finish the guidance job, then a Ukrainian operator can steer the narwhal the rest of the way. The missile is equipped with an in-house visual navigation system that has been designed by LPP, which allows it to continue flying toward a target even when navigating GPS-denied areas. There are no details provided about exactly how this visual navigation system works. Speculatively, it may be akin to the systems used by first-person view drones, which have built-in cameras that allow them to beam real-time footage of the battlefield back to their operators. If the narwhal has a similar type of system, that means a Ukrainian pilot could guide the missile from launch to target without the need for GPS. Plus, such a system also means that Ukraine's operators could actively divert their narwhals toward more desirable targets, should such targets appear en route to the initial target. Ukraine will also have options in terms of how it launches its new narwhal missiles. Defense Express says that the missile can be launched via a catapult, via a road or runway with the use of a launch trolley, or from the same stretches of tarmac if the missile is equipped with a solid fuel rocket booster. Such versatility never goes amiss, though the version of the narwhal that Ukraine gets may end up missing one of those options. That's according to Petrash, who says that the catapult launch method will likely be phased out of later variations of the missile. The decision appears to have been made not due to any issues with this launch mechanism, but because the catapult structures required are easy targets for an enemy. Aktualne also reveals that rocket assistance can help the narwhal to reach a height of 50 meters, or about 164 feet, in just 1.5 seconds. So speed of deployment isn't going to be an issue for Ukraine. It's starting to feel like the narwhal cruise missile has everything but the horn that makes its sea-dwelling namesake so famous. There also isn't much in the Ukrainian arsenal currently that directly compares to the narwhal. Defense Express brings up the Barracuda 500M as the closest comparison. In November, the outlet reported that Rheinmetall is going to produce a new version of that cruise missile, which it claims will be better suited for strikes against Russia. Even then, the new version of the Barracuda 500M won't pack as much of a punch as the narwhal. It has a warhead weighing 85 kilograms or 187 pounds, which is almost double the size of the original Barracuda's warhead, but still way behind the size of the warhead packed into the narwhal. Range is a little more competitive. The original Barracuda 500M can travel up to 900 kilometers, or nearly 560 miles, albeit with the much lighter warhead. Defense Express expects the new version to have a range of around half that. Again, that's less than the narwhal's range. All of this means that Ukraine may be getting a major upgrade on a cruise missile that was already being redesigned to inflict more pain on Russia. There's just one sticking point: the price. We know that the Barracuda 500M has a per-unit price of $216,500, which is already very impressive for a cruise missile. Unfortunately, LPP hasn't revealed the per-unit cost of the Narwhal, though Defense Express suggests that it's unlikely that the price will be lower or even comparable to the Barracuda 500M. That makes sense given the larger warhead and greater range. However, it means that Ukraine will have to make careful choices when it comes to which of these cruise missiles it chooses to deploy and for which operations. These are nice choices to have, though. Ukraine was never supposed to reach the point where it could hit Russian targets on Putin's home turf. Now it's receiving a glut of new long-range weapons that make the country an even more dangerous enemy to Russia. The debate about which of these two weapons to use may be settled by the final Narwhal feature that we've yet to cover. The missile is designed to operate as part of a broad, unmanned system. Petrash explains the concept while revealing that the Narwhal has been designed so it can be deployed in tandem with drones that LPP produces. We will send 10 or 20 of our main 40-kilogram drones to overload the enemy's air defenses. At the same moment, 2 Narwhals will fly rapidly above them, and above those there will be another pair of invisible ones, Petrash says. It's an interesting concept, and it means that Ukraine will have the option of deploying entire drone swarms alongside its new Narwhal cruise missiles. Those swarms will be targeted by Russian air defenses, essentially acting as decoys, while the Narwhal missiles sneak through and score direct hits on their targets. Defense Express speculates that the specific 40-kilogram drone to which Petrash refers is LPP's MTS, which has a similar range to the Narwhal. The drone is much slower than the missile, hitting a top speed of 230 kilometers or 142 miles per hour. If Ukraine were to use this drone, it would have to send plenty in advance of a Narwhal to ensure the drones reach a target in time to act as a diversion. The MTS also carries a 12-kilogram or 26.4-pound warhead of its own, making it an attacking threat should Russia's air defense systems miss their shots. As for the invisible ones that could be deployed alongside the Narwhal, that's likely a reference to LPP's Night Ray stealth drone. That drone carries a payload of about 30 kilograms or 66 pounds, and is equipped with the same type of navigation system. It appears that LPP is creating a series of drones that can be deployed together, though it's unclear if they'll work alongside one another as part of a network. There's also the possibility that Ukraine will be able to deploy other long-range drones alongside the Narwhal, though that hasn't been tested yet. The Narwhal hasn't reached Ukraine yet after all. Maybe these are the kinds of combat tests Ukraine will carry out when the first batches of the new Czech cruise missile arrive during the first few weeks of 2026. We've already covered some of what the Narwhal brings to Ukraine, particularly in terms of its range, explosive capabilities, versatility, GPS jamming resistance, and the seeming ability to operate alongside a horde of drones. But in the wider context of Ukraine's strategy against Russia, the arrival of the Narwhal signals something very simple: an upgrade on Ukraine's ability to conduct deep strikes inside Russia. That's an ability that Ukraine wants to strengthen and refine as much as possible, as some speculate that it's these types of strikes that now serve as its best offensive option against Russia. In October, the New York Times published an article explaining why Ukraine is betting on these kinds of strikes. Ukraine's many hits against Russia's energy sector, in particular, are designed to bring the pain of the war back home to Russians, perhaps with the intention of pushing Putin into taking peace negotiations seriously. Chatham House built on this in a November 10th article, going so far as to claim that Ukraine's long-range attacks on Russia's oil refineries have become its best defense, as Russia once again targets Ukraine's energy infrastructure to cause a difficult winter. The outlet points to rising gasoline prices in Russia, with the fuel being 10% more expensive in October than it was before Ukraine started its concerted refinery strikes. Shortages have occurred in Crimea and several other Russian regions as demand for fuel grows. And this is the type of domestic pain that Ukraine needs to cause to put pressure on Putin. At the very least, Ukraine could use this approach of taking out Russian fuel to push for an energy strike ceasefire, even if it can't achieve a total ceasefire. Ukraine certainly seems to have taken the approach of attempting to answer every long-range strike that Russia carries out with strikes of its own. In his November 14th address to the Ukrainian people, President Volodymyr Zelensky made it clear that long-range strikes, combined with other pressures, are key parts of Ukraine's strategy. Ukraine must do everything to ensure that not a single Russian strike goes unpunished, Zelensky declared. Our weapons, global sanctions, and political pressure on Russia, all of this is working, and it will be even more effective. The Narwhal could be a powerful string in the Ukrainian bow if it has that sort of approach in mind. After all, Russia won't want even more powerful strikes against its refineries, and it will certainly be wary of a new cruise missile that can both reach one of its main air bases and cause serious damage to anything stored within. The Narwhal being combat tested in Ukraine is also an interesting aspect of the story. Back in January 2023, CNN published a piece in which it claimed that Ukraine has become a testbed for Western weapons. The need to innovate in Ukraine is strong, and the war the country fights with Russia has already demonstrated the effectiveness of a huge range of drones, in addition to apps, air defense weapons, and munitions that might have experienced minimal combat use in the past. Business Insider published an article that took the same angle over 2.5 years later, stating that the Ukraine war's front lines have become a proving ground for new weapons. Ukraine is as aware of this as anybody, the outlet says, and this awareness has even led to Ukraine inviting other countries to rely on Ukraine to test their new weapons. It's a win-win situation. Ukraine gets something that it may be able to use to hurt Russia, and the weapon maker gets as definitive evidence as it could ever need about how well, or otherwise, the new weapon works. Ukraine has even launched a program named Test in Ukraine that facilitates these types of relationships with Western arms manufacturers. Perhaps the narwhal is part of that program. Even if it isn't, LPP is going to be gathering a lot of helpful data about its new cruise missile in the coming months, all thanks to Ukraine. That data could lead to tweaks and improvements from which Ukraine, the Czech Republic, and any other future purchases of the narwhal will benefit. What makes all of this so interesting is that Ukraine offering itself up as a testing ground for new weapons is also clever in the sense that it helps the country further ingratiate itself with its allies. The narwhal stands to make the relationship between Ukraine and the Czech Republic stronger based on everything we just said. As important as the narwhal will be to Ukraine's long-range strategy, this strengthening of relationships with Western partners could be even more beneficial to Ukraine in the long run. Ukraine's long-range strategy isn't the only thing that's getting